Hey guys, and welcome back to another video on my channel. I know that this quarantine is getting spread longer and longer as the days go on, so I hope that these videos are helping you guys get through it, and I hope that you're all staying well and staying healthy and staying home if possible. I just wanted to say that at the beginning of the video because I know that this is some really hard times for absolutely everybody. So with that all being said, let's get right into today's video. Today we are going to be talking about the Pascagoula abduction. I feel like I haven't done an alien case in quite a while, and these are some of my favorite things to talk about. I'm absolutely fascinated by aliens, and I think they're so interesting, and alien abductions are one of my favorite things to look into and my favorite things to talk about, so I'm really looking forward to sharing this one with you guys today. This case takes place on October 11th, 1973 at the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. This whole case took place when 19-year-old Calvin Parker and his 42-year-old co-worker Charles Hickson decided to go fishing at an abandoned shipyard when they were finished their work. So they were co-workers, and when they were done working that day, they both decided that they were going to go fishing at the Pascagoula River. Unlike many of the other abduction cases that I talk about on this channel, the recap of what exactly happened to these men during their abduction is very, very brief, so I'm going to just give you guys a brief overview of that before we continue into the case. So the two men, Charles and Calvin, were down fishing in the Pascagoula River when all of a sudden they saw what appeared to be a strange blue light emerging from the clouds. Now, as they were looking at this light trying to figure out what it was, they noticed that it was coming from a football-shaped like object that was also now coming out of the clouds and was hovering right above them. Shortly after noticing this, the object started to become closer and closer until it was pretty much right above them. And just at that point, three strange beings emerged from the ship and somehow forced Calvin and Charles onto this ship, where they claim that they were experimented on during that time. After the experiments were done on these two men, they were returned to the exact spot where the alien beings had picked them up in the Pascagoula River. Immediately after being returned, both Charles and Calvin immediately left that area and headed straight down to the police station so that they could inform authorities of what had just happened to them. Allegedly, when the two men came into the police station, you could immediately tell that something really traumatizing had happened to them and that both men were visibly very, very shaken up. But obviously, alien abduction cases and the reports of seeing aliens and things like that are not something that you hear on a regular basis, and they aren't very easily believed. Like, if somebody's sitting there telling you that they got abducted by aliens, it's more likely that you're going to think that they're lying or they're on drugs or something along those lines than to just cave in and believe them. And that is exactly what the police who were dealing with them thought at first. So they came up with this ploy to put Charles and Calvin into a private room where they could just talk between one another, and the police would film them secretively to see if they could catch the two men in a lie. But that is not what happened. While in that room alone, Charles and Calvin just talked about how terrified they were and about how crazy it was that had happened to them. And I believe Charles was even filmed saying that he did believe in aliens and he had heard about alien abductions before, but he never ever thought that it would happen to him. And they were just apparently very, very visibly shaken up in this video. You could tell that both men were just absolutely terrified just by looking at this clip of them talking. However, I personally have not seen this clip, and I had a very hard time trying to find it online, so I'm not even sure if it was made public, but it is out there somewhere, and the police who did review these tapes do say that both men seem visibly terrified. That night after leaving the police station, it is unclear whether it was Charles and Calvin or Charles or Calvin or the police who couldn't keep this to themselves, but somebody started speaking to the media and journalists, and this case was quickly made publicized and it quickly gained a lot of public attention, and that is when it gained the name the Pascagoula incident. So going back a little bit to when this all first happened and when Calvin and Charles originally first came into the police station, again, both men were notably terrified, but something to keep and take into consideration here is that when both men came into the police station, after telling their story and whatnot, they were medically examined and both men were found to have identical puncture wounds in their arms. And they were just like these little holes Both men were also asked to take a polygraph test, which both men agreed to, and they both passed with flying colors, which is very, very rare. I mean, people fail polygraph tests when they're telling the truth. People pass polygraph tests when they're lying. Polygraph tests are just very, very unreliable, but for both men to have passed with flying colors is just something that I found personally a little bit interesting. Like most alien abduction cases, this case again gained a lot of attention very, very quickly. People are absolutely fascinated by alien abductions and alien abductee stories, whether they are factual or not, or there's nothing to back them up. People will always be fascinated by alien abductions, and I feel like way back then there was so little going on that people really got into this. So this case was very popular in that general area at that time. And shortly after this story started being publicized in the papers and on the news and things like that, many people came forward saying that they had witnessed the abduction, or I guess seen UFOs and strange lights and things like that in the sky on the night that Charles and Calvin claimed to have been abducted. Although none of these reports were as interesting or as important as the abduction itself. Since all this has happened, Calvin Parker has written 2 books about his alien abduction story. The first book is called Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, and the second one is called The Story Continues. Now, usually I would mention things like books, movies, TV shows, things like that that cover the cases that I'm talking about closer to the end of the video. However, the reason that I am mentioning these here is because the second book holds encounters, I guess, with people who have claimed to have witnessed the alien abduction. One of these, which is very interesting and is what I'm going to talk about now. On the night of October 11th, 1973, a woman by the name of Mary Blair was sitting in her vehicle with her husband, who was getting ready to leave for work where he would be working offshore. They were sitting on the opposite side of the Pascagoula River, close to where Calvin and Charles were, but not in the same general area. They were a little bit a ways away. Mary recaps in the book how the evening was quite nice and sitting in the car was almost peaceful. So peaceful actually that her husband had ended up falling asleep. After her husband fell asleep, Mary was just kind of enjoying her time in the car alone. She had the music turned on and then she decided to turn it down, and she was just kind of admiring the stars. And she said at the time she thinks that she was actually looking for the Big Dipper, but she was having quite a little bit of trouble finding it. While she was looking at the stars, that is when she noticed a strange blue light emerge from the clouds, just like the one that Charles and Calvin claimed to have seen just before their abduction. She said that this light kind of came out of the clouds and then it headed right over to the opposite side of the Pascagoula River, right in the spot where Calvin and Charles had claimed to have been fishing. Mary said that she did find this blue light to be very odd because it flew around for 30 minutes and made next to no noise at all. She said that for the about 30 minutes that it was flying around the general area, it seemed as if it was almost completely silent. So again, she had been watching this ship fly around for about 30 minutes, not really thinking too much of it, when all of a sudden she heard a loud noise as if something had fallen into the water and made a big splash. And she was looking at the water and she could see it rippling, just kind of confirming that something had actually fallen into the water. And she said from where she was sitting, it looked as if there was now a person or 2 people in the water. But she thought that they maybe had been swimming there before and she just hadn't noticed, or that her mind was playing tricks on her. She said at this time she did think that this situation was pretty weird and pretty strange, but she didn't think too much of it until the next day when news broke about Calvin and Charles' abduction. And then she knew for a fact that she had just witnessed 2 men being abducted and then returned by a UFO. She did talk about this to her husband and her family, but she never talked to it really about this too much with anybody outside of her family because her husband had asked her not to. He didn't want people to think she was crazy or that she was some tin hat wearing freak, and he just didn't want people knowing that his wife claimed that she had witnessed an alien abduction. So she was asked by her husband to just kind of keep this hush-hush to herself. But around 45 years after this incident had taken place, Mary Mary decided that she did not want to stay quiet about this anymore, and that is when she went and met up with Calvin, and the two of them talked about what she had witnessed and what he had gone through, and that is when they decided to put her encounter in his second book. And it is in there in much more detail than I have gone through, so if you're interested in this case, I highly recommend checking out that book because it's about his alien abduction experience and her experience witnessing an alien abduction. As you have probably guessed, however, just like in every single alien abduction case, despite there being people who claim to have seen strange lights in the sky over the Pascagoula River that night, as well as Mary who came forward claiming to have witnessed the abduction, there are still people out there who strongly speculate that this did not happen and that there is a separate explanation for what exactly happened to Charles and Calvin that day. Now again, I feel like in every single alien abduction case, every single alien sighting case, every UFO sighting, there are skeptics who come forward and they want to give a different explanation or a more rational explanation of what could have possibly happened that has nothing to do with anything paranormal or extraterrestrial or anything like that. And I do think that it is very important to cover both sides of those things, so the skeptic side as well as the believer side in these videos. So right now I'm going to talk about why some people are skeptical about this particular case. With that being said, that does not mean that I personally do not believe that this abduction case actually happened. I do just want to explore both sides. So I do think that a lot of skeptics will give just about anything as evidence to claim that something didn't happen. And the first thing that I'm going to talk about does seem a little bit ridiculous to me, and I'll talk about more why I think it's a little bit ridiculous as we go on. So something that is brought up quite often in this case as saying that this couldn't have possibly happened is because this abduction case is pretty unique in itself, as it doesn't really resemble a lot of the other traits that people claim to have happened during an alien abduction or when they spot a UFO. This one doesn't really have too many similarities to a lot of other alien abduction stories, and therefore a lot of people claim that this could have just been completely made up. However, I have seen skeptics come forward claiming that some cases are too similar, so now they're saying they're not similar enough and that is why this couldn't have happened, which is why I just think that this explanation as to why this case couldn't have happened is just absolutely ridiculous. Calvin and Charles both claim that the aliens that abducted them appeared to be almost like gray humanoid looking figures that stood at about 5 feet tall. Now that seems to be a reoccurring type of alien report that you get from people who have claimed to have been abducted. I'm sure we've all heard about the grays if you are interested in aliens. However, where this gets to be unique is when both men describe the aliens as having almost a robot-like appearance, which has never ever been reported before in an alien abduction case. So that was the kind of first thing that skeptics really picked at, saying that how did they just come up with a new random species of aliens? However, something that you need to think about is that aliens are not even confirmed, I guess, to exist. So how could we possibly know how many strands or species of aliens there are out there to just debunk somebody's story because their alien abduction story does not sound like every other alien abduction story that we've ever heard? Just because these aren't your typical gray aliens that get reported all the time and that they had something a little bit different about them does not necessarily mean that these men were lying. And then they go on to say that this case is too similar to another alien abduction case that I have actually previously talked about on my channel, and that would be the abduction of the Brazilian man by the name of Antonio Vilas Boas. It was one of my first videos way back when, and they say that this case and that case strike too many similarities. Charles and Calvin said that this football-shaped craft while moving towards them was almost completely silent except for the fact that it gave off a zipping, hissing-like sound that you almost couldn't hear. You had to really listen to be able to hear the sound that the craft was giving off. Antonio Vilas Boas said that the ship that abducted him was egg-shaped, and egg-shaped and football-shaped are pretty similar. I mean, they definitely aren't the same shape, but they are pretty similar. And he said that the craft that abducted him was completely silent. Charles and Calvin both went on to say that after this abduction, after they were abducted by these aliens, they went on to see many UFOs and have many strange encounters for the years following. And at first they couldn't remember everything that had happened to them while they were on board that ship, but as time went on, they started to remember a little bit more about their encounter. Charles said while remembering what exactly happened to them while they were being abducted by these aliens, he can remember now that the alien abduction was very peaceful, and that although the beings didn't communicate with him through words, they were kind of telepathically communicating to him that they were very peaceful and they didn't mean any harm to him or Calvin. Calvin went on to say several years later that in these memories where he was recapping what exactly happened to them while they were aboard this ship, that they were subjected to some sexual examinations. Now, these claims led people to be very skeptical about this case, because people wonder why it took both men so long to come forward with these memories. However, I do think that it is normal in a lot of alien abduction cases that it does take time for men, or people just in general, to remember what exactly had happened to them. However, what these men came forward claiming, again, do strike a lot of similarities to the abduction of Antonio Vilas Boas, which led a lot of people to believe that Charles and Calvin just went and read up on completely different, separate alien abductions, and then they fixed those narratives to fit their own alien abduction. Now, again, that is not me saying that I personally believe that. That is just something that I found online and I thought was pretty interesting, because that is why people are skeptical about this particular case. Another thing that skeptics really like to put out there and try and blame all of this on is saying that the abductees, or people who have encountered aliens, were on some kind of mind-altering drug when the abduction happened. And that does not just go for this case, that goes for almost every single alien abduction case that I have ever looked into. People love to put the blame on that. However, most people who have been abducted by aliens claim that that was not the case at all. And that is no different for this case, as Charles and Calvin both claim that they were absolutely 100% not on any kind of drug on that evening. Charles Hickinson sadly passed away in 2011 while still standing behind his story and claiming that all of this really did happen. And again, if you want more information on this case, Calvin Parker has 2 books written about his experience. The first one is called Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, and the second one is called Pascagoula, The Story Continues. Today there has been a historical marker placed just very close to the area where Charles and Calvin claim to have been abducted from, and that is a hot spot for tourists, especially ones who have a particular interest in alien abductions and just extraterrestrials in general. Now, I know that you guys like to have my opinion at the ends of these videos, and I think in this particular case, I do believe that there is some truth to Calvin and Charles' story. Of course, I would be a little bit more skeptical if it was just Calvin and Charles claiming to have been abducted by aliens and there was no marks on their bodies or nothing really to back it up. But I do think because many people claim to have seen strange lights flying around in the sky that night, mixed with Maria Blair's story, I just think that there is a lot going on here that definitely could point in the direction of this all actually happening. But guys, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope that you're all staying healthy and staying inside if at all possible, and just overall staying safe and busy during this really confusing and hard time. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to comment down below what you'd like to see in my future videos, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!